There is only one reason why genre exists in my opinion. The modern day word genre originates from the 4th century BC, specifically by Greek philosopher Aristotle. He wrote of 5 predicables, which are the ways we as humans can speak about something to one another. The 5 predicables are definitional species, differentia, propria, accidentia, and finally genus. But ironically, genus, which means birth, origin, race, sort, class, and most importantly kind, was used to talk about something generally. For example, a triangle is a shape. This is unlike how we think of genre today, which is used to talk about something specifically. The modern word was coined in the late 18th century in France and was used to categorise a particular style of art, usually to do with painting. The word was then nativized by the English in the early 19th century. Genre is hard to define, therefore even after centuries of debate there is no stable definition. This could be to do with the constant changeability of genre, but I'll get onto that later. For the meanwhile, I must choose my own definition based on others. Although they are not genres, the 2 most basic categories within film are fiction and non-fiction. Underneath these 2 headings are many genres, and underneath them are even more subgenres, which have their own distinctive identities separate from the larger genre they fall under. The way in which we classify a film's genre is by looking at its setting, themes, story, music, stars, editing, lighting, framing, topics, mood, and format. Therefore, American film historian Janet Steiger theorized that a film's genre can be identified in 4 different ways. The first is the idealist method, which judges films by predetermined standards. The second being the empirical method, which identifies the genre of a film by comparing it to a list of films already deemed to fall within a certain genre. The third method is the a priori method, that uses common generic elements that are identified in advance, much like the first method. And finally comes the social conventions method, that identifies genre based upon accepted cultural consensus within society. But film theorist Robert Stamm has challenged whether genre really exists, or whether they are just made up by critics. He wrote over 16 years ago that what he's saying is that genre is subjective and not objective, as they are constantly being developed, mutated and combined, making it impossible to create a definitive map of genres and subgenres. Even if you could do this, individual genres mean different things at separate times in different cultures. For example, a romance film made in America during the 1920s is going to be vastly different from a modern day Japanese equivalent. Genres are abstract concepts rather than definitive things, but there are certainly many tropes and conventions that are obviously part of set genres. For example, a film set in an isolated desert town in America during the late 19th century is quite obviously a western, just like a muscular man in a car chase is most likely an action film. Therefore, this must mean that there is a good idea in people's minds of what makes a film a certain genre. If you show a 10-year-old a film with 2 people kissing, then they would guess it's a romance film. And if you showed them a film with a spaceship in it, they would think it's a science fiction film. And they could be correct. But problems start to arise when films combine and mix genres, as many do. There are very few, if no pure genre films today, unlike in the past, when there have been pure westerns and pure gangster films, for example. Arguably, the only pure genre films today are musicals, war films, science fiction films, and fantasy films. But many films even within these genres also mix in elements of other genres and subgenres. Because of this, there are films that purposely deconstruct genre, rejecting the conventions of the genre that they should be placed in. Examples of this include All genres go through a similar evolution. They never die, but certainly fall out of fashion and give way to new genres, subgenres and trends. There is a somewhat noticeable pattern within the life cycle of all genres, and it involves 6 individual stages according to Professor Whitney Seibold. He states that all genres start in the nascent period. This is when films are being made with somewhat distinct features and have potential but have not yet been codified with its conventions. Examples of this are the crime films of the 1930s, which were the predecessors to the first fully fledged noir films, except they didn't yet feature the distinctive visual expressionism of noir. Once certain films have similarities, 1 or 2 crucial films will be made in the not yet established genre that will codify the conventions of whatever genre it is, and then the films following within that genre will imitate the conventions for years to come. Seibold calls this the codifying period, and it is the time in which the genre's standards are set and the rules are written. It's also the time in the genre's life when the most creative and innovative films are being made. But once the standards are set and have been copied many times, the genre enters its wheel-spinning period, where films become cliché and the films in whatever genre it may be become boring, because the audience knows what's going to happen before the film starts. An example of this is the crime films of the late 50s. Once a genre becomes outdated, it enters the analytical period, as to almost rejuvenate itself. The genre turns in on itself, becoming self-aware and introspective. They become darker and point fun at their own flaws, dissecting its own appeal. An example of this is Orson Welles' Touch of Evil. Shortly after the analytical period, genres enter an experimental or weird period, as Seibold names it, where genres start to overlap and become more surreal. The genre is effectively deconstructing itself. Finally, a genre will enter its homage period, where it will live on forever. There are many straight-up homage films, but there are also films that take a dead genre and breathe new life into it. An example of this in terms of noir is the neo-noir film Drive. But why is genre important at all? Well, it's down to what I said at the beginning of the video: communication. Humans have an instinctual desire to categorize things as a means to both understand and be able to communicate whatever subject it may be. In terms of genre, and more specifically genre in film, there are 2 groups of people who it is most important to: producers and audiences. Genre gives producers the chance to identify an audience and target marketing towards that audience. From the audience's point of view, they know what they're getting into. Another thing that genre does is it gives new filmmakers ready-made audiences, which helps with exposure. The problem with genre for me is that it doesn't encourage originality or uniqueness. Filmmakers stick to rigid and outdated formulas, and if they go outside the guidelines, they do so by being ironic or by pointing fun at them, which is usually very unfunny. Also, audiences stay narrow-minded, only watching films of the 1 or 2 genres they enjoy, refusing to broaden their tastes. But on the other hand, I also agree with Grant Patton, a graduate film studies student who writes in his essay The Significance of Genre that he goes on to write why genre films carry meaning, and essentially it comes down to the fact that genres are inspired by reality. The films within certain genres may be exaggerated, but they are inspired by the real world, allowing for a visceral connection to the audience. Therefore, I should personally begin to watch more pure genre films across all genres, instead of just watching films that I enjoy that often deconstruct genre and stimulate me intellectually more than viscerally. And I encourage you to also begin watching certain types of films that you often avoid, as well as embracing anything you're not interested in within any art form.